I'm going to need a new project for this program, and instead of creating a new solution, I'm going to put this one with my Ella Fitzgerald project. Whichever IDE I'm using, I'll need to open that existing solution first. If you have one of these welcome screens, it's probably listed among your recent files, but you can always click the Open button or go to the File menu and open your solution that way. Now, when I created this project, I didn't bother to give it a name that was any different from the project I was making at the time, so I'm going to rename that now. In any IDE, you can just right-click the solution and select Rename. In Writer, you have to go to the Edit submenu first and then select Rename, and I'm just going to give this a little more generic name. And now I can add my new project. Again, with any IDE, you can just right-click on the solution and add your new project. I want to make sure I'm using the Console app template, and then I'll give it a descriptive name. This program is for demonstrating user input, but what it actually does is related to the Allman Brothers Band, so I'll pick a name that reflects that. I don't want to name it for what the assignment is, I want to name it for what the program does. I'll go ahead and delete this template code since I won't be needing that. I'm also going to rename program.cs to something more descriptive. This part isn't necessary for you probably, but as I've mentioned before, I need descriptive file names because I post this code online for my students. As always, it's a right-click and rename. And again, I want to describe what the program does, not what assignment I'm working on. And the last bit of setup before I start writing code is to put a code block at the top, which I'll copy-paste to save us time. Another reminder that you should be using the format in your assignment directions for this. This program is going to take some input about the user's Allman Brothers album collection, so I'll start by creating the variables I think I'm going to need. I like to assign initial values to my variables as I create them, and I usually just give numeric variables the initial value of -1. That's not a big deal, it's just a habit that I've developed, and a lot of people just use 0. But I do think it's a good habit to assign something to your variables. If any variable names are potentially confusing, go ahead and add a code comment to explain it. For string variables, I usually assign what we call an empty string, which is just 2 quotation marks with nothing inside them. Otherwise, the value of the string will be something called a null reference, and I'd prefer not to have that. But I can also assign an actual value. They don't have to just be placeholders. And now I'll go ahead and give the user their first prompt for what I want them to input. I'm using the write method instead of WriteLine so that at the end of the question, the cursor sits and waits for them to input instead of going to the next line. And to direct the program to stop and get that input, we're going to use a method called Console.ReadLine. And now I'm ready to try running this for the first time, but since I have 2 projects open, I'll need to right-click on the one I want to run. In Writer or VS Code, I can just run it from there. In Visual Studio, you'll want to click on Select Startup Project. We have to make sure it's going to run the right program. This program now stops and waits for the user to input something, but it doesn't do anything with what they type in. I'll need to save that input to a variable. For this one, I'll put it in the guitarist variable with an assignment statement. I'm assigning what the user enters to my guitarist variable. As a quick side note, I don't like how the cursor sits immediately following the question mark, so I'm going to add a space there. And now I'll just output the variable to make sure it's really capturing what the user has entered. I'm using string interpolation here, so I have to remember to put that string symbol at the beginning, and then I can use curly braces for the variable I want to output. And let's run this again. That confirms that I'm successfully capturing what the user has input and putting it in that guitarist variable. So now I'm ready to add the prompt for the next input I want from the user. Now the variable I want to use here is called albums owned. So I'm going to set up my readLine statement the exact same way with this assignment. But I'm getting a compiler error. That's because readLine gives me a string, and I'm trying to put this into an integer variable. In order to store their input in a numeric variable, I need to convert it first. I'm still going to need a string variable to capture that input. So I'm going to make a new one, and I'll just call it input. And now I'll use that new variable in my readLine statement. There are a couple different ways to do a conversion, and both of them start with an assignment statement for the numeric variable. The first way uses the convert class, which has methods to convert to each of the different data types. So I'll type convert dot, and I'll start to type to int because I'm converting to an integer. Notice that there are multiple toInt methods here, and it might not be clear which one you need. The writer IDE displays the corresponding data types over on the right. A standard int variable is a 32-bit number, so in my class you're always going to use toInt32. And in a set of parentheses following that method name, I'll put the variable I'm trying to convert. I'll go ahead and run it just to make sure it's working so far. And it doesn't crash, so it looks like we're off to a good start. Let's go ahead and do the next prompt and see the other primary way that we can convert data types. I still need a string variable to save that input from the user, but I don't actually have to make a new one. Once I've done the conversion up above, I'm done with the input variable. That value has been converted and saved in my other variable. So I can just reuse input. And this time, instead of using the convert class, I'm going to use the data type I'm converting to, which is int in this case. I'll type int dot, and now I want the parse method. Parse is another one of those nerdy words, and in this context it means we want to convert a string to a number. And again, the variable I'm converting will go in the parentheses. Let's just do another quick test to make sure I didn't break anything. There are some very minor differences between the convert class and using the parse method, but none of them are important to us at the moment. As far as I'm concerned, you can use either approach, and when we know a little more about programming, we'll have another option that's a little better than both of these. Okay, so we've converted both of these inputs into integers. Let's take a moment to think about why this was even necessary. If you want to do any kind of math with the data, it can't be a string. Converting to a numeric data type lets us put that input to use as a number. If we don't need to do math with it, like a phone number or a social security number, we wouldn't have to convert it. For those kinds of numbers, we could just store them as strings. But since we can do some math with these numbers, let's do math and output the results. And we'll need to test it, of course. Okay, so we've gotten two pieces of input from the user. We've converted both of those to integers, and we've successfully done some math with them. We've got one more piece of data left to get, and this one is a double. So let's take a look at that. I'll go ahead and prompt the user for their input, which is going to be the cost of a single album. I'll just reuse that input variable again. And now I have those same two basic options. In the convert class, there's a method called toDouble, and I would just put in parentheses my input variable, just like I did with an int. And that works just fine. And now I still have the option of typing double.parse and converting it that way. And again, we can think of these two different ways of converting as being equivalent for our purposes. I think you should be familiar with both just so you understand what's going on if you see one of them being used in code. But just use whichever one feels easier or more intuitive for you. I definitely don't need both of these, so I'll go ahead and comment one out. And now I can do my math and update my output statement to display this new value as well. I'll put a $sign in front of this cost just so it looks a little bit like money, and then I'll run it again and try some input. There are two flaws with the way we're doing this, and one of them you can see right away. My total amount here has this crazy decimal at the end. That is just a result of floating point math. At this stage in our learning, I don't really care if our output looks ugly like this. Just so you know, when we do our string interpolation, we can also format our output so that it will display like currency. It will put the $sign in front of the value and it will round it off to 2 decimal places. But that's something for us to worry about later. The other flaw has a much bigger impact. I have a golden rule of programming, which is that users are dumb and they do things we don't expect them to do. If we ask a user how many albums they own, somebody's going to come along and type in purple. Both of our ways of converting a string to a number will crash if the user types in anything that's not a digit. This is really frustrating but it's another one of those things that we're going to have to live with until we learn a little bit more and are able to address it. Getting input from the user and using that data in our programs is a skill we're going to need in almost every program we write. Make sure you take a few minutes to try both the convert class and the parse methods so you're able to use them going forward.